Today we are going to analyze feedback in puzzle platforming segments in video games and why subtly educating the player can keep them engaged and continue playing for longer. In Portal, each of the game's main concepts build upon each other. Even from the very beginning, the concept of traversing the environments via portals was something that the developers knew that they had to gradually introduce in order to get the player comfortable with how the main idea gets manipulated throughout the game.
It's absolutely critical that players quickly wrap their heads around what a portal is. We noticed early playtesters grasped the concept much more quickly when they caught a glimpse of themselves through a portal. So we deliberately positioned this first portal to ensure that players will invariably see themselves. One of the things we learned from Narbacular Drop, our student project that became Portal, was that players often thought portals took them into other spaces, or even other dimensions. To help fight that notion, we start players in a visually unique room with memorable objects, so that when they walk through a portal for the first time, they have a clear point of reference which communicates the idea that they're still in the same basic location. For instance, the radio, which is playing an instrumental version of Still Alive, helps as well by providing some audio continuity.
For instance, when flinging is introduced to the player, it's just before the player unlocks the ability to create two different portals. The movement pattern is very deliberate and controlled to get the player comfortable with it. As the play space opens up, the player can begin going down a list and see how to maneuver around the environment and overcome the increasingly difficult challenges.
Portal momentum ended up being the hardest concept to convey. For this series of puzzles, which went through more design iterations than virtually any other part of the game, we introduced the idea of redirecting your momentum using portals, slowly, step by step. We even have the AI voice pretty explicitly explain the elements of the puzzle, something we avoided throughout most of the rest of the game.
Using gravity to fall into one portal so that you come rocketing out the other portal, a skill we call flinging, was another difficult concept to train. We designed a specific visual cue, a pushed-out concrete block with checkerboard tile above a pit, to indicate to players that it's time to use the fling maneuver. Repeated several times, this cue helps players associate pushed-out concrete slabs with flinging, in much the same way that players learn to associate cubes with buttons.
Spectacular. You appear to understand how a portal affects forward momentum, or to be more precise, how it does not.
Originally, these exit portal surfaces were static geometry in the final position, but playtesters stubbornly refused to look up to find them. This is another example of the classic game design problem of coaxing players to look up. By putting the portals on moving pistons, we were able to start them in a position that players were more likely to see.
Momentum, a function of mass and velocity, is conserved between portals. In layman's terms,
I believe this is done to bring the game into equilibrium, as the player being able to confidently progress through the levels are a positive feedback loop to the level's negative loop. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, the challenge tombs often require some new piece of equipment that the player has recently unlocked, or encourages them to think in a different way to solve a common problem. For example, in one puzzle, the player has to use the rope arrows to move from room to room quickly in order to drain the water to retrieve a collectible. Now, this isn't immediately clear, as you can stand in front of the blocked area and seemingly clear away the debris using an explosive or the fire arrows, but the HUD doesn't change and the objects don't react. Lara will think out loud a hint,
maybe this is connected to the drain.
As well as the player being able to use the game's survival instincts feature to not only highlight and give the player new ideas, but to also encourage the player to think differently. In addition, musical stings play as the puzzle nears completion. The sound effects are examples of both negative and positive. It's a reward for progressing through the puzzle as well as bringing balance to the game in order to keep you playing. We all know that feedback is crucial to our game, as we can not only get the player to move in the right direction, but also give them motivation to see what's lurking around the corner. Currently, our feedback is mostly sound effects and visual cues to demonstrate that the player is progressing correctly, but over time we will use these examples to properly communicate what we want the player to do.